The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. General, your office announced some months ago that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would be tried in a civilian trial in New York. And I have to be very direct with you. Some of us were kind of stunned because of the discovery that this offered terrorists and their ability to penetrate much of our intelligence gathering, the potential of them having a platform before the world, a recruiting mechanism. It just seemed like a terrorist dream, and I just got to be honest with you, I just think it was an incredibly misguided comment. But ostensibly it was so that we could show that America's system was superior to the others in the world, and that sounded like at least an honorable commitment. But then the administration said, there are several voices in the administration said, well, if they're somehow not convicted, that we won't let them go. In an interview with NBC News on November 18th, 2009, President Obama declared that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed will be convicted and executed. And then in testimony before the U.S. Senate, you stated that in relation to the prosecution of KSM, quote, failure is not an option. Now, I don't know how that undermines our system if we really hold that notion, because you, as the Attorney General of the United States, and certainly Mr. Obama, must know that KSM and his co-conspirators are afforded in our civilian courts the presumption of innocence. And in light of this, does the Department honestly believe that it could successfully defend against an assertion by KSM and others that these statements have tainted a civilian jury or commission members to such a degree as to deny them the presumption of innocence?
Well, maybe I can clear this up once and for all. The notion, when I said failure is not an option, that was not a prediction about the course of the trial. It was, from my perspective, an exhortation to, in the way in which a coach talks to his players and tells them, you guys got to go out there and win this game because failure is not an option. And that's what I was saying. All
right, well, I'll give you that. But the notion then that the Obama administration says that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed will be convicted and executed. The notion that the administration has said many times that we will not let them go regardless. Not only does that undermine our system, but does it not afford the attorneys of KSM the opportunity to say, well, you've tainted the jury pool here, and we're not afforded the presumption of innocence? I mean, that seems like it's not a hard question, but I don't know if you're willing to address it or not.
Well, I mean, we would have an extensive voir dire that would have to go through, and I'm sure that you could find people who would be able to judge this case based on only the evidence and testimony that was introduced during the course of the trial. The notion that somehow, some way, something that I have said has so tainted a jury or so tainted a potential jury pool that we would not be able to give Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, his confederates, a fair trial, I think is belied by that we've done this in the past with high-profile terrorism cases in the Bush administration. We have cases that are underway right now in New York that are being handled, I think, in an appropriate way, and defendants are being given fair trials. So I think we have done it in the past. We can do it in the future. I don't think anything that anybody has said in this administration has tainted our ability or impacted negatively our ability to...
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed will be convicted and executed. You don't think that that is potentially suggesting that there may not be a presumption of innocence?
Well, from my perspective, I think that the lawyers who will try this case are experienced. The evidence that we have is good, and I'm hopeful that we will have a good outcome. Well, that prediction on my part doesn't necessarily mean that I think the ability to say that the trial was fair is in some way...
well, General, respectfully, I don't think you're going to answer the question, but I do think you put a judge in the impossible position of either trying to do what's right and protect the country or break the rules as a judge that he's required. I mean, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the administration is all too quick to say, well, this person was waterboarded. I mean, if you're a defense attorney there, you've got a plethora of options to try to undermine the trial. I think everyone knows that. I certainly do. I think you do, sir. But sorry. So let me shift gears. You stated on Meet the Press last weekend that if 911 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed were brought to the U.S. for a trial and acquitted, that if he were acquitted, that, quote, there are other mechanisms that we might have to employ like immigration laws that we could use, the possibility of detaining him under the wars of law. Now, I think you meant laws of war, and that's understandable. Were you referring to the Patriot Act provision found in Section 236A of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which allows for the indefinite detention of an alien you certify as a terrorist? Was that your basis for saying that?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure about the particular section, but the laws of war certainly allow us to detain people who are engaged in conflict with the United States. They certainly have habeas corpus rights and can challenge that detention, as has happened in the federal district court here in Washington, D.C. So that, yeah, there is the possibility that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed could be detained under the laws of war.
Well, my final question, Madam Chairman, is what, sir, is your backup plan to protect the safety of Americans if you cannot rely on an immigration detention law? What's the plan here if those things fail?
Well, as I think I indicated in that the interview that you mentioned, I have great confidence in our abilities in the first instance to try the case fairly and effectively and to get a good result. There are beyond that, though, if there are other options that we have beyond the trial. There are immigration laws, there are the laws of war, and with regard to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, there are other charges that could be brought against him because of other acts that he did beyond what happened on September the 11th.
I guess time will tell. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gentleman's time has expired. I'm now very delighted to